One of the interesting things to me about the people and the work that we were doing was that it's a perfect balance between art and science. If the art's not there, it's not going to work. And if the science isn't there, it's certainly not going to work. And you have to satisfy both. So one of the things that I'm proud of was my influence on bringing newer materials into model making. And I've done that on a few different occasions and different techniques and things like that. And also bringing the look of new technology into what we were building. But I think one of the more interesting things that I was able to create was dry water. I call it dry water because it is essentially water, but it's dry. And we would traditionally use either white hourglass sand or granular salt, table salt. And usually it's salt because it's a lot cheaper. For instance, in Ghostbusters, Pat McClung and I built a miniature for the Marshmallow Man to walk up next to Central Park, and a car had knocked over a fire hydrant, and it was shooting up water. So we used table salt and kind of an air-driven fountain to make a little fountain about this tall. And it looked pretty good from a distance away. But I was never very happy with the texture of salt in free fall. And that's what we needed here. We needed water free-falling and looking like water. It just didn't behave right to me. It didn't look right. And I couldn't quite put my finger on why. So I then went into a little mind experiment and tried to figure out a particle that we could use about the same scale as table salt that was circular or spherical or maybe very slippery. And I thought, well, I'd had a bicycle frame bead blasted to remove the paint from it a few years before. And it was interesting to feel the stuff because I'd never really felt it before, but it felt very slippery because they're tiny beads of glass. They're tiny spheres of glass. So in our machine shop at Digital Domain, we had a little bucket of glass spheres for the machinist to use to clean up parts. So I went in there and I grabbed a cupful, held a video camera, poured the cup on video, plugged it into my machine, looked at the frames, and lo and behold, I'll be damned if it wasn't like a perfect little cataract waterfall coming out of that cup. The physics were perfect. It had the right kind of pointed teardrop lead and the feathery curls coming off the tail end. I noticed when it was backlit, it was green because it's soda glass, which is green like a Coke bottle. It was perfect. So this was a major thing because one of the biggest challenges in model making around water is miniaturizing white water. Fluid flowing water, yeah, you can do it pretty well. When it starts churning, it's a big deal. And it becomes very expensive and slow and difficult, and it's dangerous, and it's a pain. So I very quickly communicated this invention to my supervisors, and they were pretty excited about it because they understood the value of it. And we ended up using that material for a number of different projects. On Lord of the Rings, there's a sequence when the Black Riders are running down this creek bed and a whitewater flood just wipes them out. Most of that feathery white water is dry water. We shot elements of the stuff sort of on drums that were rotating, and they had horses' heads and they'd pour it over it to get the interaction on the surface, and all those sorts of little bits and pieces that they would composite into the scene to create this massive flood. And so that was one example where we used it. In Armageddon, when the meteor hits Hong Kong Harbor, there's this massive spray ejected from the impact point, and a lot of that is dry water. When you combine CG with practical elements or miniatures or matte paintings and just mix the tricks, it's a lot harder to spot.